So, hi, I'm Matt Loria with Auxiom, and I'm here with Earl Duby, our Chief Information Security Officer, in our first vlog, our video blog, to talk about CISA being hacked recently.
Yeah,
Earl?
it's pretty interesting, isn't it? The government agency that is supposed to be leading the way for the United States in terms of, how to protect ourselves and how to do cybersecurity gets hacked. But, honestly, we shouldn't be surprised by that. I mean, if you're the one that's out there, and if you are the U.S. agency that is talking about that, you're actually the global agency that's talking about that.
Sure.
Because typically the rest of the world follows what the U.S. government is doing in terms of cybersecurity and standards. That's why NIST is so important, because NIST is a pretty global agency as well. So obviously they're going to have a big bullseye on their back. So I'm not at all surprised that this didn't happen.
Yeah, I was actually just reading one of the directors, his own personal Twitter, now known as X, was hacked. So yeah, this top cybersecurity diplomat Nate Fick said last year his personal account on social media platform X was hacked. He called it a peril of the job, which it makes sense because you're right.
Yeah.
If you're in the business, you're gonna have a target on your back.
Well, the unfortunate side effect of this type of exposure is that it kind of lends credence to what a lot of people say about, like, hey, if I just stay, if I keep a low profile, no one will ever find me. It kind of reinforces that security by obscurity mindset that a lot of companies have
Sure.
of, I'm just not gonna, have a big presence on the internet, and then I don't have to worry about getting hacked. But I think that's the wrong message to take out of an incident like this. I think the right message to take out of this is everybody is vulnerable. Everyone is susceptible to cybercrime, even the largest, cybersecurity agency that the U.S. government has. So, hopefully when, a lot of these small and mid-sized companies look at an article or a news, posting like this, they don't get the mistaken belief that, hey, as long as I stay off of the social media or whatever, I'll be okay, because that's not the case.
Right. Right. You were telling me the other day when we were chatting about this that the vulnerability that was actually exploited was something that's kind of been in the news in previous years.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The platform has been in the news for years, at least 3 years that I can think of. So the way that these attackers got into CISA was through a VPN connection. So VPNs are technology that we use to have a secure connection between the internet, which is an insecure zone, into your internal network, which is a secure zone. And so in order to cross that, cross that boundary, you got to have a VPN, which kind of encrypts traffic and protects the inside from the outside. So CISO was using a VPN technology by a company called Avante, and Avante has been in the news for all the wrong reasons for several years now. And so I was a little bit surprised when I read that article and got deeper into it, that the way that the adversary got in there is through an Avante VPN, because I would have thought that CISA would have took those out by now and replaced it with a more secure platform. So it just kind of goes back to, one of the things we talked about was just how important vulnerability management is. It's really the foundation to all security is vulnerability management.
And if anybody's
So
watching this that doesn't know what vulnerability management is, can you bring it down to layman's terms?
yeah, to put it in real simple terms, you think about your house. So you leave your house and you go away for the weekend. You want to know that your house is secure while you're gone. So before you leave, you walk around your house and you say, hey, are all my windows locked? Are my doors locked? Is the patio door locked? Is the gate, to the alley on my fence, is that locked up? So it's really just walking around and making sure that, everything that is supposed to be, in order is in order before, before you leave. Because, obviously if an adversary wants to get into your house, they're not going to take a hatchet and chop their way through your wall. They're going to try to find an open door or an open window, and they'll come in that way. Or if you have a really weak lock on your door, they'll just, uh, pry your door open with a crowbar or something. So vulnerability management is just making sure that your locks are as strong as they need to be, your windows are closed and locked up, your basement is locked. So it's really just understanding your environment and making sure that there's no avenue for someone to just easily get into your house.
So it's almost just like simple housekeeping, right? And
Yeah.
we had talked about it that vulnerability management is something that's done on an ongoing basis. You had told me uh, to look into it monthly, right? To do a monthly check would be reasonable for most organizations.
Yeah, because the way that this plays out in an organizational setting is you have something called a vulnerability management tool. And it basically just scans your network looking for flaws in software, looking for operating systems that need to be patched or upgraded. It looks for computers that are old and need to be replaced or updated, things like that. So you're scanning your whole network looking for those weaknesses. And you don't want to do that just like once a year, because vulnerabilities pop up all the time. Like every day in the news, there's a new vulnerability that's being, shown in the news. And so these things are constantly being, revealed or whatever. And so you got to make sure that your tool, your vulnerability management tool, is getting those updates. But you also don't want to scan every day, because that's just a lot of traffic that you're putting on your network. And honestly, no one can actually react to the findings that quick. So if you do it once a month, you're getting the latest updates in there, or pretty much the latest updates. You are scanning your network looking for those weaknesses, but then you have time to fix them, because it's not just about finding the vulnerabilities, it's about actually fixing the vulnerabilities. So if you find that your front door is unlocked, you don't just say like, oh, my front door is unlocked, and then kind of go on with your business. You actually got to lock your front door.
Right.
So when you find that you have, operating systems that, say you have Windows machines and 15 of them need to be patched, you actually got to take the time to go patch those, operating systems. And so that's what that month allows you to do, is find your vulnerabilities, gives you time to remediate the vulnerabilities, and then you run it the next month, and hopefully you see a lot of those old vulnerabilities falling off because you fixed them. And then now you're finding the new ones that have been updated in the database, because these vulnerability management tools, they have a huge database, and they're getting constantly fed with the latest vulnerability information from all the different software providers. So as they find vulnerabilities in their own code through self-testing and bug bounty programs, they're updating that information. It goes into the vulnerability management tool, and then that's what you're scanning your network with. So you got to have a little time in there to process the vulnerabilities that you find, and then prepare for the next set of scans.
So when we go into an organization and run the scan for the first time, it's typically a whole lot of stuff. And then
Yeah.
month after month after month, it starts to whittle down because you've addressed those, and you're maybe only finding, of the 20 doors, only one of them is unlocked, or maybe only one of them has a weak lock that needs to be remedied.
Yeah, exactly. And what you'll find is, your son ran out the door and didn't lock it when he left. So it's finding the things that aren't just historical, but you're also finding things that are just happening. And that's why it has to be a continuous vulnerability scanning, as opposed to let's just do it once a year.
Yeah,
Because
you
I hear that every once in a while, is like, we only have to do this once a year. I'm like, no, you can't do it once a year, because you might have a vulnerability sitting out there for 360 days.
Sure.
And that's a lot of exposure to have if you're in a crime-ridden neighborhood like the internet.
Right. It's funny, you got me thinking about my own garage, right? I've got two garage doors, car doors, and then I've got one man door on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And usually there's a bunch of stuff in front of that door. I have no idea if that door is locked or not,
Right.
And so, just even thinking about that in the household terms is like, what do I have to do in my own home, right? Usually the front door thing, the example you gave about your son leaving it open, mine Mine wouldn't just leave it unlocked; he'd leave it wide open. So I can usually tell the
Yeah.
vulnerability that I have when we leave the house.
Yeah, and this is why it's really important, when we do risk assessments, because we do lots of risk assessments for these companies that we work with, and one of the first things we look for is like, how are you identifying your vulnerabilities? How are you doing that scanning? Who's looking at the reports of the scan? Because again, it's not good enough to just have a tool run a scan. It's the actual follow up that gets you the value. And so it's really looking at your organization and figuring out how you have integrated vulnerability management into your overall security or risk management process. And
I think
a lot of people overlook that piece.
yeah, I think in IT it's kind of funny. I feel like, have you ever had a contractor over your house, and as soon as he looks at the work from the previous person, he says, "Oh, what a fool was in here! Who could have done
Yeah.
this?" And sometimes it's us as the homeowner who did that, so he's right. But oftentimes it's like we had a qualified person in there doing it who had a set of a bit of information that we gave them that made them do the work the way that they did it. And right or wrong, maybe it's just a varying of opinion. I feel like in IT, a lot of the challenges is that everybody's got their own kind of methodology of things, and so what do you think could have happened in a situation like this where it's a government organization? Don't Wouldn't somebody have come along and said, "Hey, I'm not sure who the guy was here last year, but look at what's going on right
But
now."
I think a lot of it is priorities, and you don't really know what's going on inside of an organization in terms of, how much staff they have, how much time the staff members have, because everything is about priorities. It reminds me of, going back to the house analogy. So when I bought my very first house, I had no idea what I was doing, and you hire the home inspector to come in and say, all right, look at this house and tell me if it's worth the price they're asking for it. So I hire this guy out of the phone book, had no idea who he was. And he shows up, and he starts going around this house, and he says, "Oh, this isn't the code. Oh, this isn't the code." And he's got this big long list of, he's checking outlets and he's checking wiring and he's checking all this stuff. And he's just like, "Nope, not up to code, not up to code, not up to code." So after a while, I'm like, "Damn, this is a pretty long list this guy's putting together." And I asked him, I said, "So of all of this list, do I have to fix all this stuff, or is there some stuff I can fix now and other stuff I can fix, maybe in a year or two? And, is there some way I should be kind of addressing this list?" And he's like, "Well, I can't tell you that. I can only tell you what's up to code and what's not up to code."
Mm,
And I was like, "Man, I'm paying you like a fair amount of money to do this inspection for me. I would expect that you can tell me like things that I absolutely should fix, or things I shouldn't even buy this house because these things are present." And the guy wouldn't do that. He was just like, so I actually kicked him out of the house. I didn't even let him finish the inspection. I threw him out. I said, "Hey, look, I need more than this." And so I hired another inspector and brought them into the house. And that guy was actually like, "All right, this one you need to fix like really quickly. This one
mm,
you need to have the homeowner fix it before you even buy this house. These things here, yeah, it's not up to code, but it's not a big deal." So my point being, you can get this big long list of vulnerabilities, but unless you prioritize them and kind of tackle them, in a timely manner, something could last out here for years that might actually be a high priority thing if you prioritized it wrong.
sure.
So it's possible that they looked at this Avante, VPN situation and said, "All right, we have these other controls in place, so we think that we have some time before we have to fix this VPN situation that they have."
Mm,
And maybe these other controls just weren't as effective as they thought they were, or whatever. So that's part of the challenge when you see an article like this of like, "Oh, I can't believe these fools didn't, address
right.
this Avante situation." It's like, well, we don't really know what was going on inside of that organization, because hindsight always says yeah, you obviously should have fixed that thing. See, it got exploited. But when you're inside of that running it, you might think you have other controls in place that are going to mitigate the adversary's ability to get to that vulnerability that you have. So it's kind of got to give them a little bit of some leeway on it. But on the other hand, anybody listening to this that has Avante VPNs really need to think about replacing that technology just because it's had such a troubled history.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just like the first time this flared up with these guys. There are multiple instances of Avante VPNs just not holding up their end of the bargain when it comes to securing an environment. So I think it's time that people start moving on.
Should we put a plug in for Palo Alto at this point here?
Well, I'll tell you, when I worked at a previous company before going off on my own and then ultimately coming here, we had Avante VPNs and we replaced them with a combination. Because another thing with VPNs, you like to have different risk profiles. So, you don't want to bring in your employees, your third parties, contractors, consultants, have them all pass through the same thing and then come out the other side with the same, access rights. So we decided to take out the Avante firewall or VPNs and replace it with a two-tiered solution.
Mm.
So we ended up going with Palo Alto's for our employees, and then we used Cisco VPN for third parties and other people. That way we could set up different kind of penetration zones. So the employees came in and they had a different set of access rights than third parties coming in had much more restricted access rights. And so we used technology to kind of drive those two different risk zones.
Interesting. All right. Well, thanks. We'll be bringing our folks, our any of our viewers, clients, prospective clients, just fans of Auxiom. We'll be bringing more information like this to you in a timely fashion. And thank you, Earl Duby.
All right, thanks.